when American officers announced to a group of German women prisoners that they would be served a traditional Thanksgiving feast complete with turkey and stuffing. The women thought it was the cruelest joke their captors had yet devised. These weren't ordinary prisoners, they were members of the German Women's Auxiliary Corps, captured during the Allied advance through France in the autumn of 1944. Young women who had served the Third Reich as radio operators, nurses, and administrative personnel, now facing their first American holiday in captivity. What could possibly make enemy soldiers believe that their captors would waste precious wartime resources on a feast for prisoners? Before we discover what happened in that mess hall, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The announcement had come that morning during roll call. Captain Robert Mitchell, the camp commander, stood before the assembled women with an interpreter at his side. His weather-beaten face showed neither cruelty nor excessive kindness, just the practiced neutrality of a career military man doing an unusual job. "Ladies," he began, and the interpreter translated into German. "Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, an American holiday of gratitude and celebration. You will join us for a traditional meal, turkey with all the trimmings." The German women stood in their neat rows, faces carefully blank. But their eyes told a different story. Some showed confusion, others suspicion. A few revealed something more dangerous, hope, quickly suppressed. 22-year-old Greta Hoffman, standing in the second row, felt her stomach clench. She had been hungry for so long that the word turkey seemed like a word from another language, one she had forgotten how to speak. Back in Hamburg, her family had been living on ration cards that grew thinner each month. Meat was a memory. Bread was fought over. And here was an American officer speaking casually about turkey as if it were nothing remarkable at all. Beside her, Liesl Werner let out a quiet sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something closer to despair. "They're mocking us," she whispered in German, her lips barely moving. "Trying to break our spirits by describing food we'll never see." But Anneliese Koch, standing just behind them, wasn't so sure. She had been watching the Americans for 2 months now, studying them the way she had once studied radio frequencies. These people didn't seem to understand cruelty the way she had been taught to expect. They were strange, in their casualness, their smiles, their inexplicable kindness. Maybe, she thought, but didn't dare say aloud, maybe they were telling the truth. The thought terrified her more than any threat could have. September 15th, 1944. 2 months before that impossible Thanksgiving announcement. The transport truck rolled through the gates of the Springfield camp carrying its unusual cargo. 37 German women, ranging in age from 19 to 34, sat on wooden benches in the back of the vehicle, their gray auxiliary uniforms dusty and wrinkled from days of travel. They had been captured near the French border as Wehrmacht forces retreated, processed through temporary facilities in England, and finally shipped across the Atlantic to a country most of them had only seen in propaganda films. Greta Hoffman pressed her face close to the canvas opening, catching glimpses of the Massachusetts countryside. Trees blazed with autumn colors she had forgotten existed. Red barns stood fresh painted against green fields. Houses with white picket fences lined roads that showed no signs of bombing or artillery damage. It was as if the war existed in some other dimension, never touching this place. The propaganda had told them America was suffering, that British blockades and U-boat warfare had brought the nation to its knees, that American cities burned under the weight of a war economy that starved its own people to feed its military machine. But the evidence before her eyes told a different story entirely. The building stood intact. The people they passed looked well-fed, their clothes clean and whole. Children played in yards without the haunted look she had seen in German cities. Liesl Werner sat across from her, arms wrapped tight around her torso. At 20 years old, she was among the youngest in their group. She had joined the Women's Auxiliary Corps straight out of secondary school, eager to serve the fatherland in its hour of need. Her father had been a party official in Munich, her mother a devoted believer in the Reich's destiny. Now Liesl stared at her hands, refusing to look at the American landscape passing by. If she didn't see it, perhaps it wouldn't challenge everything she had been taught to believe. Anneliese Koch, at 24, was older and more observant. She had worked as a radio operator for Wehrmacht communications, intercepting Allied transmissions and helping coordinate German defensive positions. She understood codes, patterns, the way information could be shaped and manipulated. As the truck slowed at the camp entrance, she noticed details that others missed. The guards looked relaxed, not rigid with the tension of men expecting trouble. The compound was clean but not oppressive. Barracks buildings stood solid and weatherproof. This was not the brutal prison camp they had been warned about. The truck stopped. American soldiers opened the canvas back and gestured for the women to climb down. No rifles pointed at them. No shouted commands or rough handling. Just directions in English that none of them fully understood, and a surprising patience when they moved slowly, uncertain of what was expected. Captain Mitchell appeared, the same officer who would later announce the Thanksgiving feast. "Welcome to Springfield," he said through an interpreter. "You'll be processed, assigned quarters, and given your camp orientation. We run a clean facility here. Follow the rules, and you'll be treated fairly." The processing took 3 hours. Each woman was photographed, fingerprinted, and interviewed through interpreters about her service record and family background. Their meager possessions were cataloged and returned to them. A few letters from home, photographs, small personal items that had survived capture and transport. Greta clutched a silver locket containing a picture of her younger brother Klaus, who was serving somewhere on the Eastern Front. She had not heard from him in 7 months. They were assigned to Barracks C, a long wooden structure with rows of narrow beds, each with a thin mattress, 2 wool blankets, and a footlocker. Windows lined both sides of the building, letting in afternoon light that seemed almost aggressive after the darkness of transport ships and temporary holding cells. The women moved through the space silently, claiming beds without discussion, each retreating into her own thoughts about what this captivity would mean. Greta chose a bed near the center of the barracks, equidistant from both doors. A strategic position, though she wasn't sure what she was strategizing against. She sat on the mattress and felt it compress beneath her weight. It was thin but clean, more comfortable than many places she had slept during her service. Her footlocker sat empty at the end of the bed, waiting for possessions she didn't have. Liesel took the bed next to hers, moving with mechanical precision. Her blonde hair, once carefully styled, hung limp around her face. Her blue eyes, which her mother had always said were her best feature, looked flat and distant. She opened her footlocker and placed inside it a small Bible, the only item she had carried through capture. It had been her grandmother's, inscribed with family names going back 4 generations. All those names, all that history now felt like weight she could barely carry. Annalise selected a bed near the window where she could observe the compound. From her position, she could see the camp's main yard, the mess hall, the administrative buildings, and the fence line. Guard towers stood at each corner, but the soldiers in them looked bored rather than vigilant. She counted 3 guards visible in the yard, all of them carrying rifles, but holding them casually, as if they were props rather than weapons they expected to use. An American sergeant entered the barracks, a woman in her 30s wearing a crisp uniform with corporal stripes. She was the first female American soldier most of them had seen. She walked down the center aisle with confident strides, meeting the eyes of prisoners who dared to look at her. Her name tag read Harrison. In careful, slow English, she explained the camp rules. Lights out at 2200 hours, roll call at 0600, meals at 0700, 1200, and 1800 hours. Work assignments would begin in 3 days. The dinner bell rang at precisely 1800 hours. The German women filed out of their barracks, forming an uncertain line outside the mess hall. They had been fed during transport, but those meals had been minimal: thin soup, hard bread, weak coffee. The kind of rations they expected in captivity, the kind of rations many of them had eaten while serving the Reich. They entered the mess hall with lowered eyes and tense shoulders, prepared for whatever humiliation or deprivation awaited them inside. What they found instead stopped several women in their tracks. Long tables with benches stretched across the room, already set with metal trays, cups, and utensils. The smell hit them like a physical force: bread baking, meat cooking, vegetables steaming. Real food smells, the kind that had become rare even in Germany before they were captured. Their American guards gestured them toward a serving line where kitchen staff stood ready with ladles and serving spoons. Greta moved through the line in a daze. A man in a white apron placed 2 thick slices of pot roast on her tray. Another spooned mashed potatoes beside it. Gravy followed, then green beans, then a roll with a pat of butter. Her tray grew heavier with each addition until she was carrying more food than she had seen in a single meal in over a year. She found a seat at one of the long tables, setting her tray down carefully as if the food might disappear if she moved too quickly. Around her, the other German women sat with similar expressions of disbelief. Liesel stared at her roll, turning it over in her hands. "Real butter," she whispered. "Not margarine, not ersatz, butter." She tore the roll open and watched steam rise from the soft interior. In Munich, bread like this had become a memory by 1943. The ration cards her family received allowed them dark, dense loaves that tasted of sawdust and desperation. This roll was white, soft, almost sweet. Anneliese ate methodically, her mind racing as she chewed. She was calculating, analyzing, trying to understand the logic behind this abundance. Prisoners were supposed to receive minimal rations. The Geneva Convention specified adequate nutrition, but adequate didn't mean generous. Yet here was food that exceeded anything she would have called adequate. The pot roast was tender, properly seasoned. The potatoes were real, not the dehydrated powder they had eaten in service. The vegetables were fresh, not tinned. An American guard, a young man who looked barely 20, walked past their table carrying his own tray of identical food. He caught Anneliese watching him and offered a small smile before sitting with other guards at a nearby table. They ate the same meal, the same portions, the same quality. In that moment, Anneliese understood something that would haunt her for weeks to come. This wasn't special treatment for prisoners. This was just normal. This was how Americans ate. The next morning brought the German women their first full day in the camp routine. Roll call at 6 in the morning found them standing in formation outside their barracks, breath visible in the cold Massachusetts air. Sergeant Harrison counted them with businesslike efficiency, calling out numbers in English while they responded in German. The process took less than 10 minutes, nothing like the lengthy, aggressive inspections they had endured under their own officers. After roll call, they were escorted to the mess hall for breakfast. Greta had barely slept, her mind spinning with confusion about the previous night's meal. She had convinced herself that dinner had been an aberration, a one-time show of generosity to ease them into captivity. Surely breakfast would reveal the truth. Watery porridge, stale bread, the kind of minimal sustenance appropriate for enemy prisoners. Instead, she found herself staring at scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with jam, and coffee that actually smelled like coffee rather than the roasted grain substitute she had drunk for the past 2 years. The guard manning the serving line was a tall man with dark hair and an easy smile. His name tag identified him as Private Torres. He spoke to each prisoner as they passed, even though none of them understood his English words. "Good morning," he said cheerfully to Greta. "Hope you're hungry." She nodded uncertainly, and he placed an extra strip of bacon on her plate with a wink. The gesture was so casual, so unmarked by hostility or condescension, that she felt her carefully maintained composure crack slightly. Liesel accepted her tray with trembling hands. The bacon alone represented more meat than her family's weekly ration in Munich. She carried her food to a table and sat down, but found she couldn't eat. The abundance felt wrong, obscene somehow. Her mother's last letter, received 3 months before her capture, had described standing in line for 4 hours to receive a half loaf of bread and a small portion of margarine. And here Liesel sat, an enemy prisoner being served bacon as if it were nothing remarkable. Private Torres noticed her distress. He approached the table with a cup of water, setting it down beside her tray. "You okay, miss?" His voice was gentle despite the language barrier. Liesel looked up at him, this young American with concerned eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. He wasn't supposed to care. The propaganda had been clear about American soldiers: brutal, uncultured, interested only in domination and revenge. Yet here he stood, worried about a German prisoner who wasn't eating her breakfast. Anneliese watched these interactions with analytical precision. She noted how the guards moved through the mess hall without weapons drawn, how they spoke to prisoners with neutral or friendly tones, how they seemed genuinely unbothered by the presence of enemy nationals in their facility. One guard, a red-haired corporal named Murphy, was actually laughing with another soldier near the kitchen entrance. Laughing, as if this were just another day at just another job, not the supervision of captured enemies. The disconnect between expectation and reality was beginning to create cracks in the worldview these women had carried across the ocean. After breakfast, the women were given their first work assignments. Most were assigned to basic camp maintenance, laundry duty, cleaning, kitchen assistance. The work was neither difficult nor humiliating, just routine labor that needed doing. Greta found herself assigned to the laundry facility, along with 8 other German women and 2 American supervisors. The laundry building was warm and steamy, filled with large industrial washing machines and drying racks. One of the supervisors, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, demonstrated the washing process with patient hand gestures and simple English words. She treated the German women not as enemies, but as new workers who needed training. When one prisoner struggled with the heavy wet laundry, Mrs. Patterson helped her lift it without comment or criticism. During a brief break, the German women clustered together near the folding tables, speaking in quick, hushed German. Greta voiced what several were thinking. This doesn't make sense. Why feed us so well? Why treat us like this? Liesel wrapped her arms around herself, defensive. It's a trick. They're fattening us up before they show their true nature. You've read the reports about American brutality. But another woman, Margaret Stein, shook her head slowly. What reports? Propaganda reports written by people who had never met an American. I've been watching them. They treat each other the same way they treat us, casually, without excessive formality. This might just be how they are. The suggestion was met with uncomfortable silence. If this was simply how Americans behaved, then everything they had been told was a lie. And if they had been lied to about this, what else had been false? Annalise had been assigned to the administrative building, helping to organize supply records under the supervision of Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a Chinese-American officer whose very existence challenged German assumptions about American society. Lieutenant Chen was efficient, intelligent, and treated Annalise with professional courtesy. She explained tasks clearly, checked work without hovering, and even thanked Annalise when she completed assignments accurately. During the lunch break, Annalise sat in the mess hall, picking at another generous meal: beef stew, fresh bread, salad, and apple pie for dessert. Apple pie. She watched American soldiers moving through the serving line, observed their casual interactions, their relaxed body language. These were not the tense, fearful movements of people living under deprivation. These were people who expected abundance, who took it for granted. That evening, after the workday ended, the German women gathered in their barracks for the first real conversation since their arrival. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a desperate need to understand what they were experiencing. Greta sat on her bed, surrounded by 6 other women, all speaking in low voices about the same troubling observations. The food is real, one woman said. I worked in the kitchen today. I saw the storage rooms. Meat, flour, sugar, coffee, vegetables. More than I've seen in years. It's not for show. This is what they have. Liesel still resisted. Then why are they feeding it to us? We're prisoners, enemies. Annalise finally spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Maybe that's exactly why. Maybe they can afford to. November 20th arrived with gray skies and a bitter wind that promised winter's approach. The German women had been at the camp for just over 2 months, long enough for the initial shock to settle into a kind of bewildered routine. They worked their assignments, ate their inexplicably generous meals, and tried to reconcile their daily experiences with everything they had been taught about their enemies. That morning's roll call included an unusual addition. Captain Mitchell stood before the assembled prisoners with his interpreter, his expression revealing nothing. He cleared his throat and began to speak, pausing every few sentences to allow the translation. Ladies, in 3 days, on November 23rd, America will celebrate Thanksgiving. This is a national holiday, a day when we give thanks for our blessings and share a feast with family and friends. The German women listened with polite incomprehension. They had never heard of this holiday. The interpreter continued translating as Captain Mitchell explained. It is our tradition to serve a special meal on this day: roasted turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, and pumpkin pie. This year, you will join us in this tradition. You will receive the same meal that every American family enjoys on Thanksgiving Day. The words hung in the cold morning air. Turkey. The word alone seemed absurd. In Germany, turkey was a luxury item that had disappeared from markets years ago. Even chicken had become rare. Most German families were surviving on potatoes, cabbage, and whatever protein they could obtain through increasingly limited ration cards. And here was an American officer casually announcing that enemy prisoners would be served turkey as if it were a reasonable, normal thing to do. Greta felt her fellow prisoners shift uncomfortably around her. She could sense their confusion, their suspicion, their desperate hope that this might somehow be true, mixed with their certainty that it could not be. The announcement seemed designed to mock them, to emphasize how thoroughly they had lost the war by showing them the abundance they could never have. Captain Mitchell continued speaking, his tone matter-of-fact. "We want you to understand what this holiday means to Americans. It's about gratitude, community, and sharing what we have with others. You are under our care now, and that means you share in our traditions. The kitchen staff will begin preparations tomorrow. If any of you have experience with cooking and wish to help with preparations, you may volunteer." The assembly was dismissed. The women walked back to their barracks in stunned silence. Once inside, the flood of reactions broke loose. "They're insane," one woman said flatly, "either insane or cruel. Why announce a feast they have no intention of serving?" Liesel sat on her bed, her face pale. "It's psychological warfare. They want us to hope, to expect something wonderful, and then they'll give us nothing. The disappointment will break our spirits more effectively than any punishment." But Margaret Stein, who had been watching the Americans carefully for 2 months, offered a different interpretation. What if they mean it? What if they actually plan to serve us turkey? November 21st dawned cold and clear. The German women went about their morning routine with distracted minds, still processing the impossible announcement from the previous day. As they filed into the mess hall for breakfast, several noticed unusual activity near the kitchen entrance. American soldiers were unloading crates from a truck, and the women caught glimpses of what looked like enormous frozen birds. Greta was assigned to kitchen duty that morning, a rotation that usually involved washing dishes and wiping down tables. But when she reported to the kitchen entrance, she found herself face to face with something she had not seen in over 3 years. 4 massive turkeys sat on the preparation counter, each bird larger than anything she remembered from before the war. The head cook, a jovial man named Sergeant Baker, noticed her staring. "Those are for Thursday," he said through gestures and simple words. "Big birds. Gonna feed everyone real good." She moved closer, unable to help herself. Each turkey must have weighed at least 15 pounds. In Hamburg, a bird like this would have fed her entire family for a week, perhaps longer if they were careful with portions. Yet here were 4 of them, just for one meal, for one day. Sergeant Baker saw her expression and misinterpreted it as curiosity rather than shock. "You ever cooked turkey before?" He mimed the motion of preparing a bird, and Greta shook her head mutely. By midday, word had spread through the camp about what the kitchen workers had seen. During lunch, the German women sat together in their usual section of the mess hall, speaking in rapid, hushed German. Liesel gripped her fork tightly. 4 turkeys. Ilse counted 4 whole turkeys in the kitchen for one meal, one day. Anneliese, who had developed a reputation for level-headed analysis, did the mathematics in her head. 4 birds that size could feed perhaps 150 people, generously. The camp held 37 German prisoners and roughly 80 American personnel. The numbers made sense, but the abundance behind those numbers defied everything they knew about wartime rationing. Margaret leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw them unloading other supplies too. Sacks of potatoes, fresh vegetables, flour and sugar, spices, butter. Real butter, not margarine. This isn't a show for our benefit. This is actually happening." Another woman, Clara Vogel, spoke up bitterly. "While our families starve in Germany, we sit here about to eat like kings." The guilt in her voice reflected what many of them felt, a deep, gnawing shame that they would experience abundance while their loved ones suffered deprivation. That afternoon, Captain Mitchell made an unexpected announcement through the barracks. He was accepting volunteers to help with Thanksgiving preparations. Any prisoner with cooking experience who wished to assist in the kitchen would be welcome. The offer was met with suspicious silence initially, but slowly, hesitantly, 6 women raised their hands. Greta was among them. She told herself she was volunteering to confirm that the feast was real, to see proof with her own eyes. But truthfully, some part of her wanted to be part of something that felt normal, something that reminded her of life before the war had consumed everything. November 22nd brought the German volunteers into the kitchen for preparation work. Greta stood nervously near the doorway as Sergeant Baker assigned tasks through a combination of English, gestures, and patient demonstration. The kitchen was already warm from ovens being preheated, and the counters were covered with ingredients in quantities that seemed almost obscene. Greta was assigned to help prepare stuffing, working alongside an American private named Helen Rogers, who showed her how to cube bread, chop celery and onions, and mix the ingredients with butter and herbs. The smell of sautéing onions and celery filled the kitchen, and Greta felt tears prick her eyes. It was such a simple domestic scent, something she associated with her mother's kitchen in Hamburg before the war. She had not realized how much she missed ordinary cooking smells until they surrounded her again. Private Rogers noticed her emotional response but said nothing, simply continued working alongside her with quiet companionship. Liesel had reluctantly volunteered as well, driven by the same desperate need to understand what was happening. She found herself assigned to peeling potatoes alongside 2 other German women and an American corporal who worked in comfortable silence. The pile of potatoes seemed endless, enough to feed an army, she thought, then realized with bitter irony that they were literally feeding an army. Just not the army she had expected to be feeding when she joined the Women's Auxiliary Corps. As the day progressed, the kitchen became a strange space of cooperation between former enemies. Language barriers dissolved into shared tasks and mutual focus on the work. Sergeant Baker moved through the organized chaos with calm authority, checking preparations and offering encouragement. He treated the German volunteers exactly as he treated his American kitchen staff, with professional courtesy and the occasional joke that transcended language through tone and gesture alone. By late afternoon, the first turkey went into the oven for a test run to ensure proper cooking times for the next day. As it roasted, the smell began to permeate not just the kitchen, but the entire camp. Greta stepped outside for a break and found other prisoners standing near the mess hall, faces turned toward the building like flowers seeking sun. They were smelling it too, the rich, savory aroma of roasting meat, herbs, and seasonings. A smell that spoke of celebration and plenty in a world they had known only as a place of scarcity and struggle. Annalise stood among them, her analytical mind trying to process the sensory evidence before her. Smell was harder to fake than sight. You could stage props, arrange displays, create illusions for the eyes, but this smell was real, complex, layered, the result of actual food cooking in actual ovens. Her stomach responded with an audible growl, and she felt her face flush with embarrassment. But around her, other women's stomachs were responding the same way, their bodies betraying the hope their minds were still trying to suppress. That evening in the barracks, the women who had worked in the kitchen were bombarded with questions. Is it real? How much food is there? Are they really going to serve it to us? Greta sat on her bed, her hands still smelling of onions and herbs, and tried to find words for what she had witnessed. It's real. All of it. More real than anything I've seen in years. November 23rd. Thanksgiving Day. Greta woke before the wake-up call, her stomach tight with anticipation and anxiety. Around her in the darkened barracks, she could sense that others were awake as well, lying silently in their beds and contemplating the day ahead. When the lights finally came on at 5:30, the usual groans and complaints were absent. The women rose quietly, dressed in their standard camp clothing, and prepared for morning roll call with unusual attentiveness. Breakfast was smaller than usual, coffee, toast, and fruit. Sergeant Baker had explained through gestures the previous day that they should save their appetites for the afternoon feast. The German women ate sparingly, their minds already racing ahead to what the day would bring. After breakfast, they were given the morning free from work duties. Captain Mitchell announced that the Thanksgiving meal would be served at precisely 1400 hours, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The hours between breakfast and lunch crawled by with excruciating slowness. Some women tried to read. Others wrote letters they knew would be censored, but felt compelled to write anyway. Greta sat on her bed with her locket open, staring at the photograph of her brother Klaus. She wondered what he was eating today, if he was even still alive. The guilt threatened to overwhelm her, The guilt of being safe, of being fed, of being about to experience abundance while her family and countrymen suffered. At 13:30, the call came to assemble for the meal. The German women formed a line outside the mess hall, their faces reflecting a mixture of emotions too complex to name. American soldiers lined up beside them, not as guards but as fellow diners about to share a meal. The doors opened, and what the prisoners saw inside stopped several of them in their tracks. The mess hall had been transformed. Long tables were covered with white cloths. Place settings included real plates, not the usual metal trays, and cloth napkins. Centerpieces made from autumn leaves and small pumpkins decorated each table. But it was the serving area that drew every eye. 4 golden-brown turkeys sat on platters, their skin glistening and perfectly crisped. Surrounding them were enormous bowls of stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, cranberry sauce, green beans, sweet potatoes topped with marshmallows, dinner rolls, and corn. At a separate table, pumpkin and apple pies waited for dessert. The German women moved through the serving line in a daze. Each prisoner received a plate piled high with turkey, stuffing, and sides. The portions were not sparse or calculated. They were generous, almost overwhelming. Greta carried her plate to a table with shaking hands. She sat down and stared at the food before her. The turkey was carved thick, the meat white and tender. The stuffing steamed, flecked with herbs and vegetables. The mashed potatoes were creamy, topped with rich brown gravy. This was more food than she had seen on a single plate in years. Around her, other German women sat in similar states of shock. Some had tears running down their faces. Others wore expressions of complete bewilderment. Liesel held her fork, but seemed unable to move it toward her plate. Greta lifted her fork with trembling fingers. She cut a small piece of turkey, the meat separating easily under the pressure of her knife. The white flesh looked impossibly tender, nothing like the tough, scarce meat she remembered from Germany. She lifted the bite to her mouth and placed it on her tongue. The flavor exploded across her senses, savory, perfectly seasoned, juicy. Real meat. Real, abundant, impossibly delicious meat. She closed her eyes and chewed slowly, wanting to preserve this moment, this taste, this impossible reality. Around her, other women were having their first bites. Some wept openly. Others ate in stunned silence. Clara Vogel put down her fork after one bite and covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Margaret reached over and touched her arm gently, offering wordless comfort for feelings none of them could adequately express. This meal was breaking something inside them, some wall they had built around their understanding of the world, their place in it, and the nature of their enemies. Liesel forced herself to take a bite of stuffing. The bread was soft, the herbs fragrant, the butter rich. She thought of her mother standing in line for hours to receive a single loaf of dark bread. She thought of her younger sister, only 14 years old, who had written about being constantly hungry, and here sat Liesel, an enemy prisoner, eating stuffing made with real butter and fresh herbs as if such things were common and unremarkable. Anneliese ate methodically, her mind racing even as she consumed the generous meal. She had been analyzing the Americans for 2 months, trying to understand their logic, their strategy. But this feast demolished her analytical framework entirely. This was not strategy. This was not psychological warfare. This was simply what Americans did. They celebrated abundance by sharing it. Even with their enemies, especially with their enemies, the implications were staggering. American soldiers sat at nearby tables eating the same meal. Private Torres caught Greta's eye and smiled, raising his coffee cup in a friendly toast. The gesture was so casual, so unmarked by hostility, that Greta found herself automatically lifting her own cup in response. She was toasting with an American soldier. She was sharing a feast with the enemy. And somehow, in this moment, neither of those facts carried the weight they should have. Captain Mitchell stood at the front of the hall and raised his voice to speak. The room quieted. Through the interpreter, he said words that would echo in the prisoners' memories for the rest of their lives. Today we give thanks for many things, for peace that will soon come, for the end of suffering, for the chance to show that even enemies can share a table, share a meal, and remember that we are all human beings first. The interpreter's German translation carried through the hall. Several prisoners wiped tears from their faces. The meal continued for over an hour. After the initial shock wore off, the German women began to actually eat rather than simply stare at their plates. Conversations started quietly, first among the prisoners themselves, then gradually extending to nearby American soldiers. Language barriers remained, but food created its own vocabulary. A soldier offered to pass the gravy to a German prisoner. A prisoner offered to cut a pie for an American corporal. Small gestures of civility that would have been impossible weeks earlier. Greta found herself sitting across from Private Morrison, a young soldier from Iowa who had been part of the kitchen crew. He attempted conversation in slow, simple English. "Good, yes?" He pointed at the turkey. She nodded, searching for the English words she had been learning. "Very good, thank you." His face lit up with pleasure at her attempt to communicate. He pointed to himself. "James," then gestured to her questioningly. "Greta," she said softly. He repeated her name carefully, pronouncing it correctly on the first try. Sergeant Baker emerged from the kitchen carrying additional pies to enthusiastic applause from both American and German diners. He bowed theatrically, bringing laughter to the room. The sound of that laughter, genuine, shared between former enemies, felt revolutionary. Greta could not remember the last time she had laughed. Laughter had become something from another lifetime, before the war consumed everything. Liesel watched these interactions with conflicted feelings. Part of her wanted to remain separate, to maintain the dignity of distance between captor and captive. But another part of her, a part she had tried to suppress, wanted desperately to be part of this moment of shared humanity. When Private Rogers, who had worked alongside her in the kitchen, came over to ask if she wanted more sweet potatoes, Liesel found herself nodding and even attempting a smile. The dessert course began. Pumpkin pie and apple pie were served with real whipped cream. Greta had not tasted whipped cream in 4 years. The sweetness felt almost painful after so long eating bland, rationed food. But it was a good pain, the pain of something beautiful returning after long absence. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, knowing that this moment existed outside of normal time and normal rules. Annalise observed everything with her characteristic attention to detail. She noticed how Captain Mitchell moved through the hall, speaking briefly with both American soldiers and German prisoners. She saw Sergeant Harrison laughing with one of the German kitchen volunteers. She watched Private Torres teaching a prisoner the English word for cranberry. These were not the actions of victorious soldiers lording their triumph over defeated enemies. These were the actions of people who genuinely believed that breaking bread together mattered, that sharing a meal could bridge chasms created by war. As the meal drew to a close, the German women began to help clear tables without being asked. The evening after Thanksgiving found the German prisoners gathered in their barracks, still processing what had happened. The meal had been real. The abundance had been genuine, and now they had to reconcile that reality with everything they thought they knew about America, about the war, about their own choices. Greta sat on her bed, her stomach still full in a way it had not been in years, and felt the weight of cognitive dissonance pressing down on her thoughts. Liesel spoke first, her voice small and confused. "They fed us better than the Reich ever did. Better than our own country fed us while we were serving it." The statement hung in the air, dangerous in its implications. To acknowledge that the enemy had shown more care for their well-being than their own government was to question everything they had believed, everything they had sacrificed for. Margaret had been thinking about this all afternoon. The Reich told us America was weak, starving, barely able to feed its own soldiers, but we just ate a feast that would be impossible in Berlin. They lied to us about this, and if they lied about this, what else was false? The question opened a chasm beneath their feet. If the propaganda about America was wrong, then what about the propaganda about the war's purpose? About Germany's destiny, about who the real enemies were? Annalise had been silent until now, but she felt compelled to voice what they were all beginning to understand. I intercepted Allied communications for 2 years. I helped coordinate defensive positions. I thought I was defending Germany against aggressive enemies who wanted to destroy us. But those soldiers today, they looked at us with kindness. Not triumph, not cruelty, kindness. She paused, struggling with the words. What if we were defending the wrong side? The suggestion felt treasonous even to say aloud. Several women looked away, unable to meet her eyes. but others nodded slowly, their faces reflecting the same terrible realization. Clara spoke quietly. My father was a party member. He believed in the Reich's mission completely. He told me I was serving the most righteous cause in history. I wrote him letters describing my dedication to that cause. She stopped, her voice breaking. How do I tell him I was wrong? How do I tell him we were all wrong? The group fell silent. Outside, they could hear American soldiers moving through the camp, their voices casual and relaxed. Inside, 37 German women confronted the collapse of their worldview. Greta thought about her brother Klaus, still fighting somewhere for a cause that was beginning to seem hollow. She thought about her mother in Hamburg, faithful to the party line, believing in Germany's righteous struggle. How could she explain that the enemy had shown her more humanity than her own nation had? Liesel pulled out her grandmother's Bible, the one she had carried through capture. She opened it to a passage her grandmother had marked years ago. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Simple words, but their meaning hit differently now. November 25th brought the return to normal routines, but nothing felt normal anymore. The German women went through their work assignments mechanically, their minds still occupied with questions that had no comfortable answers. During the evening free time, many of them sat at the small writing tables in the barracks, attempting to compose letters home. But how could they explain what they had experienced? Annalise sat with blank paper before her, pen poised but motionless. She had been writing letters to her mother since her capture, carefully worded messages that passed through military censors. But tonight, she wanted to write something true, even knowing it would never be sent. Dear Mother, she began, I need to tell you something I can barely admit to myself. The Americans are not what we were told. They are not brutal or cruel. They fed us a feast for their holiday, real turkey, real abundance. They shared it with us as if we were guests rather than prisoners. She paused, imagining her mother's face, reading such words. Her mother, who had sent her off to serve the Reich with such pride. How could she continue? I think we were lied to, Mother. About America, about the war, about everything. I think I served a cause that was not what I believed it to be. The words looked stark and terrible on the page. She folded the letter and placed it in her footlocker, knowing she would never send it. Greta attempted a letter to her brother Klaus. She wrote about the weather, about being treated fairly, about hoping he was safe. But she could not write the truth, that she was eating better as an enemy prisoner than he likely was as a German soldier, that she was beginning to question whether his sacrifices meant what they had believed they meant. Instead, she ended with a simple lie. I hope the war ends soon so we can all go home. But even as she wrote it, she wondered where home was anymore. Liesel wrote to her father, the party official, who had been so proud when she joined the Women's Auxiliary Corps. Father, she began, you raised me to believe in the righteousness of our cause. You taught me that Germans were superior, that our enemies were lesser peoples driven by greed and cruelty. I am writing to tell you that I was wrong to believe those things, that we were wrong. She stared at the words, then crumpled the paper and threw it away. Her father would never understand. Perhaps she did not fully understand herself yet. Clara composed a letter to her sister, the only family member she thought might listen. The Americans celebrate something called Thanksgiving. They gave thanks for their blessings by sharing a feast with everyone, including us, their prisoners. I cried during that meal, not because the food was so good, though it was. I cried because I realized how wrong we were about them. About everything. December arrived with snow and shorter days. The German prisoners had been at the camp for nearly 3 months, long enough for their initial shock to settle into something more complicated. A slow, painful reconstruction of their understanding of the world. The generous meals continued. Not Thanksgiving feasts every day, but consistent, adequate portions that would have seemed luxurious in Germany. Fresh bread at every meal, meat several times a week, vegetables that were not withered or rationed. Greta found herself gaining weight for the first time in years. Her uniform, which had hung loose when she arrived, now fit properly. Her face had lost the gaunt look that had become normal during her service. She caught a reflection in a window one morning and barely recognized herself. This was what adequate nutrition looked like. This was what her body was supposed to look like when it was not slowly starving. The realization brought a fresh wave of anger and grief. She had accepted hunger as normal, as necessary sacrifice for the war effort. She had believed the Reich when it said, resources must go to the front lines. that civilians and support personnel must make do with less. But here was proof that such deprivation had not been necessary at all. America was fighting the same war, sending soldiers to the same battlefields, and yet still feeding its people, even its enemy prisoners, with abundance. Liesel was struggling with her faith. She had grown up believing that God favored Germany's cause, that they were fighting for Christian civilization against godless enemies. But the Americans were clearly Christian. She had heard them singing hymns on Sundays. She had watched their chaplain moving through the camp with gentle authority. If God was on Germany's side, why were the Americans showing more Christian charity than Germans had shown anyone? She approached the camp chaplain, Father William O'Brien, one afternoon during recreation time. Through an interpreter, she asked him questions that had been burning inside her. "Why do you treat us kindly when we are your enemies?" Father O'Brien listened carefully before responding. "Because Christ Chapel. He invited any prisoners who wished to attend, promising that the service would be in both English and German. Nearly all 37 German women came, along with most of the American personnel. They sang Silent Night together, first in English, then in German, the two languages intertwining in harmony. Greta felt tears streaming down her face as she sang the familiar words, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. This song had been sung by German soldiers and civilians for generations. Now it was being sung with American voices, creating something that transcended national boundaries. The Christmas meal was not as elaborate as Thanksgiving, but it was generous. Roasted ham, potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, and for dessert, gingerbread cookies that reminded several prisoners of childhood Christmases before the war. Liesel bit into a cookie and tasted cinnamon and molasses, flavors she associated with her grandmother's kitchen. The taste brought memories flooding back. Christmas mornings with her family, her father reading from the Bible, her mother serving special treats they had saved for months. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, to a different Liesel who had believed in certainties that no longer existed. After dinner, someone produced a harmonica, and music filled the mess hall. American folk songs that the prisoners did not know, but which carried the universal language of melody and rhythm. Then one of the German women, a young woman named Helga, began singing a German folk song. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying notes that spoke of mountains and forests and home. Other German voices joined her, creating harmonies that filled the space with longing and beauty. The Americans listened respectfully, and when the song ended, they applauded with genuine appreciation. Annalise sat near the window, watching snow fall outside in the darkness. She thought about freedom, about what it meant, and where it could be found. She was technically a prisoner, confined to this camp, unable to leave. Yet she felt freer here than she had ever felt serving the Reich, free to question, free to change her mind, free to recognize her own humanity and the humanity of supposed enemies. This paradox would have been impossible to explain to her former self, the woman who had arrived here 3 months ago. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day arrived with the same church bells and street celebrations that had marked the opening of this story. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered. For the German prisoners at Springfield, the news brought a complex mixture of relief, grief, and uncertainty. The fighting was done, but what came next remained terrifyingly unclear. Repatriation would begin soon. They would be sent back to a Germany that existed only in ruins, to families they might never find, to a country that had lost everything, including its sense of identity. Captain Mitchell called an assembly to discuss their options. Through interpreters, he explained that they would be processed for return to Germany within the coming months. But he also mentioned something unusual. Given the chaos in occupied Germany and the difficulty of immediate repatriation, those who wished could apply for delayed return through displaced person status. It was not an offer to stay permanently, but it was an acknowledgement that rushing back to devastation might not be the only option. That evening, the German women gathered for what would be one of their last meetings as a complete group. They spoke honestly about their fears and hopes. Some wanted to return immediately, desperate to find family members and help rebuild their shattered country. Others felt paralyzed by the thought of going back, of facing the judgment of those who had not experienced what they had experienced, of trying to explain their transformation to people who would see them only as failures who had been captured and corrupted by the enemy. Greta made her decision after much prayer and reflection. She would return to Germany, but not as the same person who had left. She would carry back the lessons she had learned about compassion, about abundance, shared rather than hoarded, about the possibility of to feed the hungry, even if they once wished us harm. His answer was simple, but devastating in its implications. Annalise had been assigned to help Lieutenant Chen with administrative work. She had access to newspapers now, and she read them voraciously, trying to understand how Americans viewed the war. The article spoke of fighting tyranny, of liberating oppressed peoples, of defending human dignity. The language was so different from German propaganda, which had spoken of racial destiny, of Lebensraum, of the right of the strong to dominate the weak. One afternoon, Lieutenant Chen noticed her reading an article about concentration camps that Allied forces had discovered. The lieutenant said quietly in careful English, "I know this must be hard for you to see." Annalise looked up, tears in her eyes. We did not know, or maybe we did not want to know. By mid-December, something fundamental had shifted in the camp dynamics. The invisible wall between American guards and German prisoners had dissolved almost completely. Conversations happened naturally now, mixing broken English and broken German with gestures and goodwill. The prisoners no longer moved through the camp with defensive postures and downcast eyes. They walked with purpose, engaged in their work, and participated in camp life as something approaching community members rather than captives. Greta had volunteered to help in the kitchen permanently. She worked alongside Sergeant Baker and Private Rogers, learning American cooking techniques and picking up English phrases. The kitchen became her sanctuary, a place where actions mattered more than ideology, where the simple work of preparing food created something valuable and real. She found herself laughing at Sergeant Baker's jokes, even when she did not fully understand the words. One morning, while kneading dough for bread, she had a realization that stopped her hands mid-motion. She was happy. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since the war began, she felt something approaching happiness. The feeling brought immediate guilt. How could she be happy when her family suffered, when her country lay in ruins, when so many had died? But the feeling persisted anyway, stubborn and undeniable. Liesl had found unexpected friendship with Private Rogers. The American woman was only a year older than Liesl, and they discovered shared interests despite the language barrier. Both loved music. Both had younger siblings they worried about. Both had believed they were serving righteous causes, only to discover moral complexity where they expected certainty. Private Rogers began teaching Liesl English in earnest, and Liesl taught her German in return. During one of their lessons, Private Rogers asked through gestures and simple words why Liesl had joined the Auxiliary Corps. Liesl struggled to explain in her limited English. "I believe Germany was right, was good. Now, I think I was wrong." Private Rogers nodded with understanding rather than judgment. "My brother fought in France. He came home different. War makes everyone question everything." The compassion in her voice brought tears to Liesl's eyes. Annalise had developed a reputation as the most fluent English speaker among the prisoners. She served as an unofficial translator, helping bridge communications between the German women and American staff. Lieutenant Chen had begun giving her increasingly complex assignments, trusting her with sensitive documents and important administrative tasks. The trust felt both validating and painful. Validating because she was being treated as capable and reliable. Painful because she had not received such respect from her own officers in the German military. She wrote in a private journal one evening, words she would never share. "I came here as an enemy. I remain here as something I have no words for. Not quite prisoner, not quite free, not German anymore in the way I was, not American, though I begin to understand them." Christmas of 1944 approached with a mixture of anticipation and melancholy among the German prisoners. This would be their first Christmas in captivity, far from families and homeland, celebrating with the very people they had been trained to consider enemies. Captain Mitchell announced that the camp would observe the holiday with special services and a festive meal, and once again prisoners would be welcome to participate in preparations. The mess hall was decorated with pine boughs and handmade ornaments. American soldiers and German prisoners worked side by side stringing popcorn and cutting paper snowflakes. The activity felt surreal to Greta, creating Christmas decorations with enemy soldiers as if they were neighbors preparing for a community celebration. Yet the normalcy of it all was precisely what made it powerful. This was not the harsh, militaristic Christmas she had experienced under the Reich, with its emphasis on duty and sacrifice. This was gentler, more human, focused on joy rather than obligation. On Christmas Eve, Father O'Brien conducted a service in the chapel, rather than hoarded, about the possibility of former enemies becoming friends. If Germany was to be rebuilt, it needed people who understood that there was a different way to live, a different way to see the world. The thought terrified her, but it also gave her purpose. Liesl chose differently. She applied for delayed repatriation, hoping to eventually immigrate to America permanently. The decision broke her heart, but she knew she could not return to the Germany she had left. That Germany no longer existed, and she was no longer the person who had served it. Private Rogers had promised to help sponsor her immigration application, offering friendship and support as Liesl navigated an uncertain future. Annalise decided to return, but to work with reconstruction efforts, specifically helping to process displaced persons and prisoners of war. Her language skills and her unique perspective, having been on both sides, would be valuable. She wanted to help other Germans understand what she had learned, to bridge the gap between enemies who needed to become allies if Europe was ever to find peace. Years later, Greta would tell her children about the Thanksgiving meal that changed her life. She would describe the moment she first bit into that turkey and realized that everything she had been taught was wrong. That story became her way of teaching them that transformation is possible, that enemies can become friends, and that sometimes the greatest freedom comes from admitting you were wrong and choosing